67% of young people that experience street involvement come from a conflict at home. See, the things that happened in my life, two big ones. I left home and I left school. And once I left home and left school, I was at a very vulnerable crossroads. The greatest opportunity we have to help a homeless youth or troubled kids or youth at risk, or however you want to define that, is in that prevention phase. Okay. Well, the Push for Change was an idea that started with a conversation on what could we do to change the way we address youth homelessness. My story of transformation began with the Ontario Provincial Police. And that really helped open a big door for me, led me back to school, eventually success in the corporate world. And I got to a place, I suppose, where I began asking the question about legacy. What could I do to give back to a country that's given me so much? And really understanding from my own experience, where we can invest better to help support prevention models and really kind of catch it before it happens.
Your message, your trek across the province has a direct link to what we do. Mm-hmm. And so if we engage those communities along the way, and if we engage in the youth, then I think this will be a successful partnership all around. So that's why I think it becomes important that the OPP be involved in this. There's many, many great causes out there, but investing in our youth becomes one of the most important, I think, for our organization.
1989, I was pushing a real shopping cart around Vancouver's downtown east side. I was a strung-out heroin addict. I'd cycled out. I lived underneath the Georgia Street Viaduct. I'd made every conceivable mistake that a young person could make. I was a high-volume contact person with police. I wasn't a threat as much as I was a nuisance. And I struggled with mental health, and I struggled with addiction. And I couldn't find the doorway out on my own. I'm here today because I had a mother that wouldn't give up on me. I'm here today because I live in a country that has an infrastructure to support those that are poor and marginalized and dealing with mental health issues. I was that guy that struggled with addiction and poverty and homelessness, but inside me all that time was a possibility.
Our number one concern is public safety, ensuring that we reach out to all the different communities and find out what is the driving force for crime, for mental health, for addictions in those communities, and how do we deal with it. So this story has multiple impacts to the OPP.
I ended up coming back here to Ontario, but before I did, I ended up meeting a man who was probably one of the first people in my life who spoke to my possibility. I ended up meeting a guy named Gus on a park bench, and the only reason I met this guy is he had a cigarette and I was a mooch. Now, at the time, what stood in front of him is a man with, dirty black fingernails, yellow broken teeth, scruffy beard, clothes I've been wearing for months, and a stink that comes from living on the streets. But he said to me, there's more to you than you can see. And for the first time in my life, someone other than my mom, and let's face it, you can't always trust your mother. Yeah? Someone other than my mom spoke to my possibility. You may never know the impact your mentorship has on another person. We approached this from a grassroots perspective right from the very beginning. But it goes back further than that. My involvement with the OPP was really the turning point in my life. It was from that first interaction when I was, having a serious crisis here in Midhurst that I met Constable Scott McLeod. He was, it was a typical call and a typical night, but Scott got the call right. And out of that, I had this opportunity to transform.
It was a Monday in May. I was working the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at a Barrie detachment when the call came in. It was approximately 3:30 in the morning, and my partner and I got called in Midhurst just outside of Barrie for a suicidal male. So we met this person's mother, and she related us to the fact that her son was very despondent. He had been in a drug-induced haze for the last couple of days, and that night when she went down to check on him, she found him with a gun in his hand, and he refused to give it up. So that male was Joe Roberts. It was immediately obvious that he was severely under the influence of drugs or a combination of drugs and alcohol. He was tall, skinny, he had unkempt black hair, and he walked right into a jack post in the basement. But he was unarmed.
You know, never in my life did I have a strong, friendly relationship with law enforcement. As you can imagine, making the mistakes that I made, I saw law enforcement as the enemy, not as the protector, not as the peacekeeper, not as the social volunteers. Sometimes that's all we need, is that one person to be there to say, I believe in you, kid. And for me, one of those people who was first there for me was Scotty.
I treated him with respect and with compassion in order to get his confidence. At the time, I wasn't thinking about Joe. I hate to say it that way. I was thinking about the gun. I wanted to get that gun off the street. But since all this has evolved, I think back and I think, I treated Joe properly. I treated him like I would anybody else. It didn't matter what his situation was. I treated him properly, and I'm happy for that.
I think that from my perspective, Scott quickly identified a dangerous situation, saw a person in crisis versus a person in threat, and moved in the direction of a person in crisis to de-escalate and to get the weapon. And Scott was fair. He was amiable. He wasn't heavy-handed. At the same time, I can't imagine what was going on in his head. I was pretty muddled, so some of it's kind of cloudy. But I know that at that moment I was treated really fair.
There's a lot of bells in my life I can't unring, and I have to deal with that, and I have to forgive myself. And my way of making amends is by not repeating it, and by staying sober a day at a time and doing my best to put back into a world that's given me so much. I was actually on a plane ride with my business partner at the time, Dr. Sean Richardson. Sean is a former Olympic athlete and a psychologist, and we were on a flight into Calgary, and I said to Sean, I want to do something to invest in that prevention. He said, I got an idea. He says, if you're trying to avoid chronic homelessness for kids, he said, why don't you push a shopping cart across Canada? It's your story. It's a symbol of chronic homelessness. It's the thing that you're trying to avoid for young people. And the idea was simple. If we could go from one end of the country, leverage my story, and raise awareness and dollars to help invest in youth homeless prevention so that every young person has the opportunity to grow up and transition safely into adulthood and not have to fall through those cracks.
The OPP is going to help us in a number of ways. They're going to help keep us safe. They're going to help us engage in communities. And what it means to us is, we've got an extraordinary partner to be able to engage the people of Ontario with an important message that we need to get out.
Our support of the Push for Change is so important because it's not just about the event.
No.
It's about the long-term piece and what you can do to build that awareness piece and help us from a community perspective in each of those communities as you travel through the province of Ontario.
So beginning on the 1st of May in St. John's, Newfoundland, myself and Team Push for Change are going to commence a 9,000 kilometer walk across what I believe to be the greatest country in the world. We're going to trek through 10 provinces. We're going to visit the 3 Northern Territories, and we have an extraordinary opportunity to engage community. Push for Change is going to be a wild ride. We'd love to have your continued support and continue to take the legacy of what the OPP started 25 years ago and that fateful call.